So at the end of that time, that's when they had the dilemma. His grades were just not high enough in dogmatic theology and in the nuances of morality. And so because of that, at that particular time, you received your faculty from an outside source. And because of those grades, that outside source could not give him the go-ahead to preach anything that had dogmatic theology. And they also said, we do not feel that you're knowing those nuances in morality, we're not going to have you do any confession. And so because of that, God arranged it that he was in the perfect place for God's light to shine forth in this world. What I'd like to share with you now is a video. This was put together just a little bit before the beatification. By the way, was anybody at the beatification at Ford Field in 2017? Wonderful, and you didn't melt in all the rain. So this was put together. I like it because you get to meet the friars that lived and knew Father Solanus. You get to hear his life story. I believe you get to see Paula, the woman who had a bona fide miracle through Father Solanus' intercession at the Solanus Casey Center. Her picture is right over there on that blue banner. She's standing with Father Michael Sullivan. And you also get to hear Father Solanus' voice, and you get to hear him play his violin, which some of the brothers were not too happy when he would pull out the violin. But I'd like to share this video with you now. I hope I can turn on this projector.
Don't worry, trust in God, things will be all right.
A kind man, wanted only the very best to everybody that he met.
Love the fact that he heard more people's hearts, just as somebody who held the door on a daily basis.
Father Solanus had this great love for music.
Trust in God, trust, a great trust.
And he was filled with peace and joy and confidence. And he wanted that for everybody.
Even if you have a doubt, he had no doubt that God will do it.
God was a real buddy of his, you might say, you know.
Blessed Solanus Casey, a simple doorkeeper who opened the door to all who knocked. His deep devotion and complete trust in God gave him an inner peace and confidence that was reflected in all he did. Whether feeding the hungry, comforting the troubled, or even healing the sick, his hope was for all to enjoy the peace that comes from a true trust in God. A man who listened to everyone's story, and now we celebrate his. Bernard Francis Casey was born on November 25, 1870, in a log cabin in Oak Grove, Wisconsin. He was the sixth of 16 children born to Irish immigrants, Bernard James Casey and Ellen Elizabeth Murphy. When Bernard was a young boy, 2 of his sisters passed away from a diphtheria outbreak, a tragic event that affected the whole family. Early on, Bernard Casey showed empathy, caring, and compassion for others. Instead of continuing his education, during his 8th grade year, Bernard asked his parents to quit his schooling in order to work to support the family.
One of his jobs was to work at the jailhouse and to work with prisoners and to get them food.
During his time as a prison guard at the Minnesota Stillwater Prison, Bernard first met notorious outlaw Cole Younger from the infamous James Younger gang. Riding with Jesse James, Younger was shot 11 times and captured after a failed bank robbery in Northfield, Minnesota in 1876, not by lawmen, but by armed and angry civilians. Bernard Francis Casey was known around the prison as a people person, spent a lot of time talking and eventually befriending Cole.
And so he'd come to know Cole Younger and often would have conversations with him and on a spiritual level.
And they built this beautiful relationship with each other, and he opened this beautiful gateway, this door to mercy.
You kind of wonder, you know, the two kind of helped each other out in that way. That Solanus certainly was an inspirational person to Cole Younger, to help him to turn his life around, which he did.
Years later, on August 21st, 1912, Cole Younger declared that he became a Christian and repented of his criminal past. After his time as a prison guard, Bernard moved to Wisconsin, where he found a job working as a streetcar operator.
Nobody can understand Solanus without understanding the streetcar incident. He was driving the streetcar in Superior and rounded the bend, and there, right in front of him on the tracks, a drunken sailor was stabbing to death a woman. Well, he got out of the streetcar and tried to see what he could do, and he couldn't. It was too late.
So it was a very shocking thing to him, to the fact of someone doing such harm to another person.
Witnessing someone die before his eyes really transformed his life. And he asked himself, what can I do? What difference can I make in this world?
I believe that was his God experience.
This event had a monumental impact on him and his personal beliefs. That night, Bernard went home to pray and decided from there on that he would give himself and dedicate his life to helping others.
All of us have had miniature ones, you know, that all of a sudden we're going along minding our own business and something happens and, oh my God, well, that was his.
This is an important moment that led to his conversion that helps us to see that God works in even the most difficult moments in our lives to call us to something more.
And within 2 days, he went to his pastor and told him that he thought God was calling him to be a priest.
Bernard Francis Casey enrolled at St. Francis High School Seminary near Milwaukee in 1891. Because of the classes being taught in German and Latin, he struggled to succeed. Finally, the seminary official suggested that Bernard try a religious order instead of continuing on his current path.
He was wondering, where do I go? How do I figure out the direction that I need to go? So at one point he said, I'm going to do this prayer, this novena prayer to Mary, and ask for Mary's intercession. And after the 9-day novena, he had this inner voice, this calling that came forth from him that said, go to Detroit.
Bernard continued his studies, now under the tutelage of the Capuchins, and in 1897 was bestowed the religious name of Solanus, after Francis Solanus, a 17th century Spanish nobleman, intellectual, missionary, and preacher. However, Solanus continued to struggle through his education.
He had trouble getting through the languages to English, and so he didn't do well. And so they considered him to be intellectually inferior. But that never got in his way.
In 1904, Solanus was ordained by Milwaukee Archbishop Sebastian Mesmer as a simplex priest.
Simplex priest says he can say Mass, he can't hear confessions, and he can't preach. He can do a simple little talk, but that's about all it was.
Very often he would maybe say just a few words about the gospel or the scripture that was there for the day. He referred to them as fervorinos rather than a homily or preaching. So it was another way of him kind of actually doing it, but not in an official way, you might say.
In 1904, Father Solanus' first assignment was to leave Detroit for New York to become a sacristan, porter, and chaplain for altar boys. After serving for 2 decades in friaries and churches around New York, Father Solanus came back to Detroit in 1924, where he worked as a porter at the Capuchin Friary at the St. Bonaventure Monastery.
He was very simple in his approach to people. When people would come to him, he would simply say, have faith, have trust in God. Things are going to be all right.
You know, you do this and you do that, and you know that's what you're supposed to do. And as long as you do those things fine, then you can live your life the way everybody else does. That's not religion as Solanus would see it, or as Solanus would live it. This is real. God is real, and Jesus is real, and his love for you is real, and it can really change your life, and it can make you happier.
His biggest thing to me was his trust that God will take care of everything. And, like even if you have a doubt, he had no doubt that God will do it. And you have to let go and let God be in charge of it.
Ask, and you will receive. These were the first words Father Solanus wrote in his notebooks, and when asked, these are the words he would confer to the faithful. In his humble simplicity, he asked for God's help in healing his brothers and sisters, and God listened.
There's so many beautiful stories, and there's a story of this little girl who had a disability and couldn't walk, and the parents, they brought the 5-year-old girl to meet Father Solanus. She can't walk, and she's had this ever since she was a little kid, and Father Solanus listened to their story and said, "Come here, little girl, come here." And all of a sudden, the girl just got up and walked.
I have an older brother. At the time when I was a teenager, I was 15 years of age. My brother, I believe, was around 22 or 23 years of age. Was in a serious auto accident. and he injured his leg to the point to where they were going to amputate it. Hearing that, my mother said, let's go down and see Father Solanus. We were able to meet with him, told him the situation with my brother. He just, in a very nonchalant way, said, oh, don't worry, things are going to be all right. And sure enough, then within the next couple of days, they made a decision not to amputate the leg.
My cousin Jim Kelly was around 2 or 3 years old and was totally blind. My mother took him to see Father Solanus and got his blessing. They returned home. She took he and my brother for a short walk. And as they approached an intersection, my cousin slowed down. So my mother was aware of the fact for the first time that he was able to see. And this was certainly a miracle, thanks to Father Solanus.
Many were healed from their pain and suffering, both physical and mental, and many had their faith restored.
My favorite story of Father Solanus is at this very desk, as with this very desk.
One of the young friars came down through. He was a novice. He just stuck his head in the door and said, Father Solanus, he said, say a prayer for me. He says, I'm going to the dentist. He says, if I have to have the teeth extracted, I'll have to be in the hospital overnight, and I will miss a night of my novitiate. And if you missed a night of novitiate in the monastery, you had to start all over again. Father Solanus just goes, oh, you'll be all right, kind of tapped him on the cheek. In the meantime, there was a young family that came in with a couple children. They were carrying 2 ice cream cones. They came in and they gave them to Father Solanus.
Father Solanus said, thank you so much, thank you so much. He saw someone coming to talk to him, so he opened the drawer to his desk, and he put the ice cream cones in his desk and closed it. And his assistant said, oh my gosh, this is going to be a complete mess in a couple hours.
Well, he said it had to be a good hour or more later that this other brother that had gone off to the dentist came home, very excitable, and said, oh, Father, guess what? There was nothing wrong with my tooth. And he says, oh, I think we should celebrate. So he opens up the drawer, pulls out 3 ice cream cones, unmelted. 3, not just the 2 that he had put in there, but he pulled out a 3rd one. So he gave one to the brother that had come home from the dentist, as well as Brother Leo and himself.
And Brother Leo was in shock and awe. It's like, after all this time, it didn't melt? And I think Solanus shows us the sweetness of God's love. The taste of God's beauty and goodness is found in how we share of our lives with each other.
It was in this role that Father Solanus cemented his reputation for holiness and compassion. In charge of greeting those who came to the monastery's doors, Father Solanus conducted well-attended services for the sick and became known for his gentle, wise counsel and genuine concern for those who sought his aid.
He always had time for the people that came to see him. All the telephone calls, all the doorbells were mainly for Father Solanus.
Whoever came to him, he just said, everything's going to be all right. Trust in God. Go ahead. And everything was all right.
When people would come here, some people would need food, but it wasn't, gigantic need. And so Solanus, who was taking care of the door, along with Brother Francis, well, they'd just go back from the office, the monastery office. They'd go back to the kitchen and just get some of our food and bring it to them. But when the Depression happened, that was impossible.
The friars knew they had to do more. So in 1929, at the start of the Great Depression, Father Solanus helped Father Herman start the Capuchin Soup Kitchen in an effort to help local detritus in need of food. Father Solanus would often say to the friars, they are hungry. Get them some soup and sandwiches. In time, the lines grew to more than 2,000 people waiting for their single meal of the day.
And they knew people were going to come nonstop. And there were, at 10 30, there were only 27 loaves of bread left. They decided, well, we've got to go over to the monastery and ask Father Solanus to come and pray over the bread. Typical of Father Solanus's peace and trust and confidence, they came to him and he said, I don't have to go over to the soup kitchen to bless the bread. I can bless the bread from here. And I will never forget Ray saying I remember his conviction. He said, and I will swear on a stack of Bibles that there was no truck that came in all day long with bread. And I will swear on a stack of Bibles that the line never stopped until 4 o'clock. And I'll swear on a stack of Bibles that when it did stop at 4 o'clock, there were 27 loaves of bread left.
One of Father Solanus' greatest passions was music.
Father Solanus and had this great love for music. When someone came to Father Solanus, he distracted their hearts and their minds away from the cross, away from the difficulty, the pain, and the suffering. Sometimes he would just say, hold up, and he would run up to his room and grab the violin and come back down and would play for them and just say, I just want to play you this song.
It was kind of funny because of the fact and my own personal visit with Father Solanus, the time of we were asking for prayers for my brother. He said, he says, I just restrung a violin this morning. He says, and I used to play fiddle at the barn dances, and he says, I'd like to play it for you. So we went off to his room and came back with his violin in hand and played several tunes for us, and we thought it was wonderful. And then when I entered the order, I proudly said to the friars, I said, I got to hear Father Solanus play the violin, and they all kind of said yes, and so did we.
Although he was not considered by most standards a good violinist, he never let anyone discourage his passion. In fact, his music seemed to reach the heart and soul of all who heard it.
Everything was dark and locked up, and I heard this squeaky noise coming from out in the big chapel. And I knew exactly what it was. But I wanted to see for myself. And I opened the door to the big chapel right there. And there, with the light on up in the choir loft, all by himself, was Father Solanus playing Christmas carols on the violin to the Christ child in the crib.
Beautiful, I love the thing, found in a pleasure long time.
Today, Father Solanus' ministry lives on in the generosity of his Capuchin brothers, in the soup kitchens that he helped found and that continue to feed the poor today. On July 31st, 1957, Father Solanus passed away. His funeral had more than 20,000 people in attendance, a testament to his work and faith and the faith others had placed in his hands. In 1976, officials began collecting and organizing material for Father Solanus' cause, and by 1983, an official archdiocesan investigation was opened into the life of Father Solanus. During this investigatory phase, 53 witnesses gave sworn testimony to his heroic virtues or miracles, to be heard by the Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of Saints. As part of the beatification process, Father Solanus' tomb was opened on July 8, 1987. His exhumation would astonish all. His body, after 30 years, was almost totally incorrupt. And his remains were moved to their current resting place, a tomb inside the north transept of St. Bonaventure's Chapel. In 1995, Brother Leo Wallenweber led a 3-volume positio, which was presented to the Vatican congregation that affirmed Father Solanus' heroic virtues.
Leo was his basically Solanus' secretary. And Leo was by his side for many, many years.
He certainly was working towards that someday that Solanus would be canonized. He was totally assured that the man was a saint.
On July 11th, 1995, Father Solanus Casey was named Venerable, meaning having lived a life that was heroic in virtue, by then Pope and now Saint John Paul II, allowing for public devotion and advancing the cause for beatification. The journey to sainthood requires 2 documented miracles. Medical, scientific, psychiatric, and theological experts are consulted, and evidence is given to them for their professional opinion. All must be qualified and renowned physicians. Among the hundreds, if not thousands of healings attributed to Father Solanus during and after his lifetime, Pope Francis recognized the authenticity of one miracle necessary for the friar to be elevated from venerable to blessed.
We were able to present to Rome a miracle or a healing that was proven to be miraculous, unexpected as far as medical-wise goes.
As Brother Leo was getting older, there was a miracle that he was working on with Brother Larry and Brother Richard. Something in him, as he was going through this miracle, he said that this is the miracle. This is the miracle that would get him beatified. This is the miracle that would make him blessed. About a month after he found out about this miracle, he passed away.
The final miracle needed to raise Father Solanus to blessed involved a woman with an incurable genetic skin disease. While visiting friends in Detroit, she stopped at Father Solanus' tomb to pray. After her prayers, she felt the strong urging to ask for the friar's intercession for herself as well, and received an instant and visible healing. The miraculous nature of her cure was verified by both doctors in Detroit and Rome.
And so one of the interesting things is to the fact that she really was praying for other people at the time, and she wasn't really thinking of herself, which was really a beautiful expression of that. And it was where the Lord was able to give her the healing as well that she needed. She was quite excited about it, and she came to my office and said, look, brother, this is what has happened. She says, I've had this skin problem since childhood, and she says, it has all just fallen off. And so my skin is clear. And so we made a point to report that. We had an investigation on it, and it showed that the skin disease didn't return. Church authorities looked at it and declared it then to be miraculous.
21 years after being named venerable, on September 22, 2016, a panel of medical experts approved the miraculous healing attributed to Father Solanus, and on January 19, 2017, a panel of theological advisors concurred, paving the way for the Congregation for the Causes of Saints to recommend Father Solanus' beatification to Pope Francis.
All those who lived with Father Solanus, as I being one of them, would have to say that if this beatification and hoped for canonization down the road would never have happened, we were convinced he was holy. You don't have to have this to convince us that he was holy.
His face, even today, 60 years later, I still see his deep blue eyes. You could look right through him and he was with God or holiness.
And not because of his miracles, but he was holy because he really believed that God is real. He knew God loved him, and God loved everybody else. And this is real, and it's the only way to live if you're going to be authentic.
Father Solanus was a simple man with a simple message: trust in God. He listened, he loved, and he gave of himself entirely to all he encountered. He gave hope and healing to thousands, and in doing so, made the world a better place for all.
Gratitude is the key to Solanus and how we can thank God ahead of time, not just in joyful moments, but even in the most difficult moments of our lives, that we can still be grateful, find that path, that light, that ray of hope in God's grace, and to trust that God will not forsake, and that God will give us new life and resurrection even in the moments of our own crosses.
My purpose. God made me to know him. Oh, what a blessed aim. To love him and serve him sure rests in the same. It's heaven begun for the grateful on earth, to treasure aright, highest ever its worth. God bless you all. Beautiful of the sea, smile on the brow of the water, dear is thy memory to me, sweet.
I'm always touched by that video. I'm touched especially by that, the words that Father Dan Crosby talks about is that for Father Solanus, God was real. So many times we place God up on the clouds somewhere, way off, and we're hoping sometimes when we have our prayers that we're throwing them up and maybe God will catch them up in heaven. But for Father Solanus, God was right there. And if you asked, God was going to help you. God was going to give you. And that's why he would say, thank God ahead of time, because God's already working on it. So you might as well start thanking him. His other favorite line was, blessed be God in all his designs. Because again, not only did he think that God was real, but he believed that God was good. And that whenever God was working in your life, it was for the best. And so God's designs were so good. And that just constantly was part of who he was when he met people at the front office, at the desk there. I hear that people would wait easily 2 hours in the chairs to be able to sit across from him at the desk. And when they sat there, he had their full attention. It was the two of them. And he would listen, and he would listen intently. And some people say that he had the gift of prophecy, that he was able to know when he was with you if there was a healing taking place. And so he might say to a person who had come because the doctor had seen a tumor, he might say to that person, I want you to go back to the doctor. Have them take another x-ray. The doctor will be surprised at what he doesn't see. But there were also people who came to Father Solanus who, after they shared their struggle, Father Solanus would tell them, we're going to pray that God continues to give you the grace and the strength and the courage to carry this cross. Because this cross will be with you. But God is going to work through you and this cross for the betterment of others. It is said that if you heard you were being healed or you weren't being healed, everyone who left that desk after listening to Father Solanus, left with an incredible sense of peace because he was able to share that sense of God's goodness and God's real presence in your life. I brought with me tonight two second-class relics. So I'm sure we're a little bit familiar with relics. We have first-class relics, and that is what we brought from the Archdiocese, the first-class relic of Father Solanus that is going to be visiting you. Father Solanus has come to visit you. He's going to be visiting you for till Monday. So this is something, the relic of Father Solanus. This is a bone that was taken from his right hand. On August the 1st, 2017, as part of the protocol for beatification, we closed down the entire center. We said we had maintenance to do. But what we really had to do was to pull up the tomb of Father Solanus, open the casket, and examine the body. As protocol, they have to exhume the body, make sure that it's Father Solanus, check out the situation with the body, and then remove any first-class relics. So what they did was they removed a number of bones from his right hand. The right hand was very important because it was Father Solanus's right hand that he would use as the porter to open the door for all the people who came to St. Bonaventure asking for help. It is also the right hand that he would use to bless people with. And so it was very important and meaningful that that was the hand that the bones were taken from. And so the bone that you have in the reliquary here, the first-class relic, is a bone from Father Solanus's right hand. A second-class relic is something that the holy person wore or used. And so I was able to go into the archives today and talk with Father Joes, who maintains all of the artifacts and has them all noted and tagged. And so, on promise of my life, I have them here. What I brought, because I felt that it was very significant, was Father Solanus's rosary. When Father Solanus was 14 years old, he made a commitment to the Blessed Mother. And he promised her that every night he would say the rosary before he would go to bed. And he always found that the Blessed Mother always helped him out of either physical situations that he was in, spiritual situations that he was in. He learned to turn to her like she was his mother. We have a story that when he was probably around 19 years old or so, there was another young man that he was near a water area, and the young man was in the water and he started to drown. And Father Solanus, Barney at the time, jumped in to save him. But Barney was getting tangled up, and he also was drowning. And so all of a sudden, something pulled him up. And he said that he attributed it to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, the scapular that he was wearing, that he felt as if the Blessed Mother had just swooped him up and saved his life. The other young man did not make it. He did drown. And that again stuck with Barney, his life. But it was a novena to the Blessed Mother. When he was at a crossroads in his life, he had been sent home from the diocesan seminary in Milwaukee, told that he didn't have what it takes to be a priest, and that he should look into a religious order. But he didn't know where to turn. So he prayed the novena to the Blessed Mother with his mother and his oldest sister. And on the last day of that novena, it was December the 8th. Father Solanus, Barney, was coming back from communion when he says the Blessed Mother spoke to him. And the Blessed Mother answered that novena, "Where should I go?" with 3 words: "Go to Detroit." So the Blessed Mother sent him to us in Detroit. He came here to Detroit on Christmas Eve, 1896, and he asked to be a Capuchin. He was accepted, and he went through the formation, and they made him sign a paper when he said that he wanted to become a priest. They told him, "We will allow you to become a priest, to go through the studies, but you didn't do so well the last time you were in the seminary. And we don't want you to think that coming here to the Capuchins is going to automatically make you a saint, going to automatically make you a priest. So if we find that you're not up to par, we're not going to ordain you. Do you still want to be a Capuchin?" And he said, "Yes, I want to be a Capuchin. As for being a priest, I leave that in God's hands." I think most of us, even after he had gone to all of the seminaries and did all of that studying, to still have your job that you're going to do to be the job of opening the door. I think for many of us, it would be very, very humbling, and it might be too much. I don't know if I would have been able to stay with the Capuchins. But he didn't look at it that way at all. For him, he understood that this was exactly where God wanted him to be. And because he cooperated with God's vision for his life, we're here today. We have stories of people in our lives and our families who were touched by Father Solanus's belief in the goodness of God, and they were healed. And I'm talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. One of the other things I brought down was Father Solanus's journal. So this journal was on the desk in the front office. And when someone would come in and sit across from him, he would take their name. He would put down the date. And he would write a little synopsis of what the situation was. We have 7 of these notebooks that are filled with these amazing stories. I often tell the groups that come through that a number of years ago, while I was leading a group of students, 5th graders. We got 5th graders here? Raise your hand. 5th graders? All right. So there were 5th graders that were coming through the Solanus Casey Center on a museum tour. And we got in front of a showcase where we had one of those books randomly opened. All right, 7 notebooks, all kinds of different pages in the notebooks, randomly opened. These 2 boys are looking at this notebook through the glass, and they're pointing at it. And I'm like, what's going on? So I went up to the boys, and I said to them, what's going on? One of the boys turns to me, and he says, last summer, my grandpa died. And when we were at the funeral home, my aunt told me that when my grandpa had been a little boy, Father Solanus had cured him. And that's my grandpa on the top of that page. From that experience, I tell more mature people who come, seasoned people who come through the center, if you have a Father Solanus story in your family, make sure you pass that on. That's a family heirloom. And if the little children are coming through on a tour, I tell them, ask your grandparents, do we have a story of Father Solanus? They are precious. They are precious. Another one happened to me last summer. There was a lady who came up to me and she said, do you know, because we change the page from time to time. And she said, do you see that page that's open to you? See that bottom, a person. And she goes, well, that's my uncle. And the write-up in it talked about a man who was coming back from World War II, and he and his unit were in charge of planting different types of bombs. Well, one of the bombs went off, and it destroyed his vision. And so he was coming to Father Solanus to see if Father Solanus could help him restore his vision so he could see again. And the lady who had come to me, it was his niece. And she said, I was in the room with Father Solanus and my uncle when he met him and wrote that in the notebook. And I said, well, you know, what happened? She goes, well, he did not receive his vision for 20 years. But he had a cornea replacement. And once he had the cornea replacement, he could see. And the first thing he said when he looked in the mirror was, who's that old man? I share those stories, again, because they have touched me. And I know that the stories that you have and have heard have touched you too. And there are wonderful books on Father Solanus. The Porter of St. Bonaventure, that's a very simple one. The first one has lots of great pictures in it. But I think my favorite one is Thank God Ahead of Time by Michael Crosby. And in it, because he was the one who had to go through all of the notebooks to start to get the material. So he had the first-hand experience of all Father Solanus' private journals. And that book, Thank God Ahead of Time, really chronicles for you his spiritual development. You can see how he grew in holiness. You can see how prayer and service really just became who he was. And throughout all of it, this sense that he shared with every person, God is real. God cares about you. Just ask. So today, as we're thinking about Father Solanus, I invite you all at some point, if you haven't come to the Solanus Casey Center yet, please do so. There's something palpable about the peace and the goodness, especially there at his tomb. I am very excited to share with groups the story of Paula, because it's amazing. You know, in our world where we're so skeptical of so much stuff now, we can say that a real miracle happened, and it happened at the tomb of Father Solanus. And I say that because the investigation that had to go on in order for the Vatican to accept that was very, very intricate. I have worked at the Solanus Casey Center now for 14 and a half years, and I've seen amazing things. But I can't call any of those things a miracle, even though I would like to. I can call them favors. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of those favors. But in order to say something's a miracle, it had to go through official investigations. And one of the things that I tell groups that come through is that when we were having our official investigation, where Paula was brought in and she gave her testimony of what she experienced, and doctors on the east side of Detroit in Grosse Pointe took biopsies, and they had to give their expert opinion. It just so happened that that particular summer, the dermatologist who was world-renowned in her particular skin disease, echotitis. Echotitis. It is that her skin turned into scales of a fish. And then it would rip open and it would bleed. And another scab would form, wouldn't hold. Her arms and her legs were massive scales and bleeding. I know that the video sort of took a little bit of a shortness there, but from what I heard the miracle took place is that when Paula was visiting us and she came to the tomb, she didn't know it right away that that was Father Solanus' tomb or anything about it. And so she heard that this was a place where you could put petitions and you could pray. And she had 14 people back in Panama that she was always keeping in prayer. So she wrote each of their names on a piece of paper and folded it and placed it on the tomb. And then she was getting up to go to lunch. But she stopped because she heard what sounded like a voice that said to her, "You didn't pray for yourself. You need to pray for yourself." So Paula knelt down, and through the intercession of Father Solanus, she asked that she could be relieved of her skin disease. As she was walking back to lunch with the Capuchins, her arms and her legs started getting very hot. She didn't want to make a big deal of anything, so she sat down at lunch, but that's when one of the scabs fell off. And every time the scabs fall off, there's a lot of blood. And so she excused herself and went to the room where she was staying. And for the first time, she looked at that spot where the scab had fallen off, and there was no blood. All night long, the scabs and the scales kept coming off. And in the morning when she woke up, her arms and her legs were smooth skin. But in her bed were all the scales and the scabs. And so when Brother Richard said she came to him in the morning, she came with a handful of those scabs and those scales. And she said, "Brother Richard, I think something's happening." And Brother Richard said, "We think so too." So we had to wait a year. That's when we called her back up from Panama. We sent her to the doctors in Grosse Pointe. They did biopsies. We had her come. It was in August. We had her come. We had a thorough investigation. And the doctor who was the most renowned for her skin disease in the whole world that summer just happened to be at Henry Ford Hospital. So we brought him over to the center, to the place where we were doing the secret investigation. And he was able to give the expert testimony that in all the world, in all the people that he's seen and treated with this disease, he had never seen what had happened to Paula. There was no explanation for it. That was all put together, sent to Rome, and then about 3 years later, we heard the news that they were accepting the miracle and that Father Solanus would be blessed.
Yeah, two things. From what I understand, she wasn't Catholic either.
No, she is.
Oh, she is?
Very Catholic. She was a catechist.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And, for Father Solanus, when they exhumed him, that they took the relic in 17.
Yes, right. Mm-hmm. August 1st, 2017. Yep.
They saw no more decay or?
There, you know, because there was a lot of water that he was in, the body was in a lot of water, we don't usually talk about incorrupt so much anymore, but what I can say is that the doctors who were examining it said it was in amazing condition. Yep. We have like 1 more minute. Is there anybody who wanted to ask a question? I know people have to go. Okay, you got 1 minute.
All right, so he's blessed now, and
Yes.
what is it, one more miracle?
We need one more miracle, yes. Now, the one thing I do have to say, because people say this all the time, he did all those miracles while he was alive. All right. In order for it to be considered a miracle for beatification and now again for canonization, a couple of things have to be in place. First thing is, this is huge, the person can only have asked through the intercession of Father Solanus. So if you are like me and something scary is happening in your life, I start calling out all my saints to help. But that would not be able to be used because we have to know that this holy person is with God. And the miracle through their intercession is God's signature to us, that this person is. The problem if you call on other saints is you never know if God is just reaffirming Padre Pio or if this is through Father Solanus. So it can only be through Father Solanus' intercession. That's what happened with Paula. It has to be permanent. So if Paula had come back the next year and the skin disease was back, we would have said, we're so happy that you had relief, but we cannot use that as a miracle. It has to be instantaneous so that she prayed at the tomb and within moments, things were starting to happen. And then it also has to be at a particular time. And that particular time means now it has to be since May the 4th, 2017. So you cannot use anything from when he was dead. I'm sorry, from when he was alive. It has to be from when he died, and then each status along the way. We are hopeful. People turn in amazing stories to us, and they get investigated. We all know that Father Solanus is holy, and I always say it's just a matter of God's time. It will happen in God's time. So I thank you so much for being here tonight. If you have any questions, I'll be around. And please come down to the Solanus Center. We would love to see you there. Thank you.
Well, we thank Sally very much for coming and enlightening us about Solanus. If we hadn't heard all of this before, it's amazing. The relic will be here through Sunday. Unfortunately, on Saturday, we have a funeral mass, so we're, but stay and look at the, whatever they are called, the banners on Saturday morning. We'll be moving those to the vestibule because we all have the funeral mass in here, but they will be here through Sunday. So I think there's a special time. It's in the bulletin. I'm not even sure. It's like after the 9 o'clock mass, so maybe from 10 to 2 on Sunday. I think the latest time is 2 o'clock on Sunday. But his relic is here for you to observe and pray in front of, and we thank you very much for coming. Kids, you did a great job. Thanks for your attention tonight. I'm sure your parents are waiting for you, so you can head out, and anybody else is welcome to stay and look around. Okay, thank you. Yes, so looking at the schedule, Thursday from 4 to 8 p.m., Friday from 9:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. Saturday will be canceled because of the funeral mass, and Sunday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m.